Awesome. Recording is started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. This is the second ATAC webinar this year. Last time we went over a lot of the different document updates to the ATAC program and changes to the various templates and documentation that we use. And one of those is the Streamlined TAS, and that's what we are going to talk about today. You're welcome to enter questions into the chat, and then we'll have time at the end for questions as well. Brief introduction. I'm Alex. I'm the ATAC coordinator on the program. I am the primary point of contact for ATACs for anything and everything that's not specifically related to a project. With that, you'll work with your assigned energy advisor and engineer for questions related to that. And then here to present today is Patrick Steelman. He will be taking us through the Streamlined TAS. And then also on the call is Eric Tu, our engineering manager, for those of you if you have not met him. Please keep your microphones muted. You can ask questions in the chat, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. And I'm going to go right into it. So we have two formats for the technical analysis studies. We've got the full TAS, which is the traditional format most of you are used to. This is a Word document that gets fully filled out with narrative and detail on the site, on existing conditions, historical usage, any other important detail for the participant, the end user. And then all of that, after it's finished, gets printed and formalized into a PDF report. This is pretty much what we're used to in the industry for as far as in energy analysis and energy study and the final report. That's better for larger sites, multiple measures, interactive effects, and usually required for sites with building modeling if some third-party modeling software is used for that. So about a year and a half ago, coming up on 2 years, we introduced the Streamlined TAS, which is an Excel-based study format. So the whole thing lives in a workbook. The purpose of this was to reduce the amount of time spent on the study and for projects where the analysis does not require building modeling and really doesn't need all the narrative and all the detail. It's definitely more utilitarian than the formal PDF report is. So the Streamlined TAS is used for measure level detail and the calculations associated with that. ATACs are welcome to use this, and our internal team uses this as well. And the goal is to just for simple measures to be able to study them more quickly and provide the calculations and analysis for review all within a single Excel workbook. And this can be used for both capital and retro commissioning measures as applicable. And so the purpose of today is to just go with full walkthrough of that workbook and show you all the different pieces and how to use it. And I'm going to hand it over to Patrick to go ahead and jump right into it and take us through there.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. So yeah, I'm just going to go through the workbook sheet by sheet. If you do have any questions, just type it in the chat, and Alex, please chime in if you feel like I need to answer the question right away, or if we can hold off until the end. But to start, the Streamlined TAS template comes with an instructions sheet that's pretty straightforward. I will note that I think it's worth to talk with your energy advisor first to help identify if it's worth to do a Streamlined TAS or a full TAS. And the reason being is that there's some customers that need the full TAS to present their findings to board members or executive teams. And this Streamlined TAS template is really not the best customer facing report. So just keep that in mind. If a customer is just looking for incentives and they really don't care what the report looks like, then this is the ideal Streamlined TAS template is what we should focus on. And like Alex mentioned, the benefits, the Streamlined TAS will help reduce study time. It also helps us on the review side. If everything's in one workbook, it's a lot quicker to follow and trace calculations back and forth. And it also helps reduce study costs and minimize risk for evaluated savings. So as you can see, the parameters in row 23, typically we're looking at streamlined TASs for studies that for savings that are less than 200,000 kilowatt hours or 5,000 therms. So if you're borderline on that threshold or the measure is just really simple to study, just work with us at the proposal stage, and we can help pinpoint if we need to do full TAS or if the streamlined TAS is acceptable. Also, we can use it for both retro commissioning projects and capital improvement projects, and ideally it's for low complexity sites or standalone systems. So like one rooftop unit, you're looking to optimize things like that. What else? So how to use the workbook, sheets are numbered and blue represent program required information. So a lot of the cells that I'll show on the next sheet that are highlighted in blue, you can manually input that. Yeah, they're shaded in blue. And then irrelevant sections in the document you can hide, and then keep in mind that we will review the streamlined TAS with the same amount of rigor as a full TAS. So we do need to make sure we have all the assumptions outlined, supporting documentation is provided, and we are able to understand and pretty much verify that this TAS is accurate based on what we see in the template. And then for submission, make sure, so the headers and footers for each worksheet, I wouldn't worry about that at this point. I think our internal team can PDF it, because if you're sending 2 or 3 different revisions and having to PDF it every time, that's somewhat of a waste of time. So don't really worry about changing the headers and footers or printing the sheets. Just submit a PDF of the appendix with quotes and potentially supporting documentation, and then just the Excel file for the workbook. And then perhaps when we approve it, we'll either PDF it ourselves or request that you send over a PDF. But for the sake of time and the whole purpose of it being streamlined, I think it takes us 2 minutes to PDF it, so we can just do that internally. And here's a little table here that shows some of the parameters and the color coding that we've used. So with that said, does anyone have any questions on this sheet, or should I just keep moving forward? I will keep moving forward. Okay, so number 1 is the cover page. Basically, all the information in the 100E is what we input here, and then the measures that you propose in the proposal will be input here. So example would be the site, project name, or context of this small office controls upgrade, or I should say VFD upgrade, and then the site name is small office. So you make sure you put the date in here, the project number. It's pretty self-explanatory. So you have the site contact at Tommy Two-Tone. Turns out he actually lives in Portland, so that was something I found out today. So this is where you put the site contact number, email address, site address, and then you'll put your energy advisor, their contact info, email, and then the ATAC, the company, and email and phone number. So this is pretty straightforward. I typically like to do this right when the project gets set up. So I just have this already filled out now. I don't have to go back and pull the 100E. And then we have our measure list here. So right now we only have 5 measures. So I think at the proposal stage, if you're selecting a streamlined TAS and for some reason we're going to have 6 or 7 measures, let us know and we can try to accommodate and add a few more measures to this workbook. I will say a lot of these sheets are locked out, so you're not really able to change formatting or things like that. So just keep that in mind. And then right here, all of these measures populate throughout the rest of the worksheet. So make sure you have the appropriate EEMs labeled and whatever the measure is. So EEM1, EEM2, you can also add EEM3A, 3B for same, mutually exclusive measure. And then if it's a retro commissioning measure, make sure you put RCX4 instead of EEM4, and make sure it's still in order from 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. So if you have EEM1 and then you're looking at a retro commissioning measure as part of EEM1, that would be labeled as RCX2. And you'll also see throughout the workbook, you'll see these orange, they're kind of hard to read, but that pretty much explains what to fill out and how this workbook works. And the rest is just language from the 120C form, I believe, and disclaimers. So pretty much everything in blue is what you need to fill out in this sheet here, and the rest you can leave as is. All right, moving on to the second page. So right here, also, if you have the 100E open or know the facility, you'll input the site name, which pulls from the cover page, so you don't need to manually input anything there. And notice that that cell is white and not blue, so that indicates that you don't need to fill that out. Facility type, we have a list here, so just select the most appropriate site. If it doesn't fall into this range, then you can just select other. It's really not that big of a deal, but we want to make sure it's selected. And then year built, sometimes there's several different years if you're looking at multiple buildings, or maybe the site doesn't even know, but you can look on Google Earth and see that building's been there for at least 30 years. Then just put older than 30 years or something. Try to determine the number of floors. You'll put the building square footage, areas affected by proposed measure. So sometimes we'll only have, we're only looking at a small office space that's 10,000 square feet. So in that case, you would put 10,000. That's what it's affected by, the measures that we're studying. And then next is your PGE or Pacific Power dropdowns. If the utility is not part of, if it's, Clark Public Utilities are not part of the ETO, not PGE or Pacific Power, you can select other. And then, you have your natural gas providers as well. And then weekly hours of operation. Right here, I just assumed, or not assumed, but I'm just putting 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, total 70. And then we've got the EUI and the median EUI. So the median EUI pulls from a list that's embedded in this workbook. I think it's sourced from CBEX data. And then the actual EUI is provided by the utility data, which is in the next sheet. So with that, we have the EEM summary table. Again, all the stuff in white you really don't need to fill out, like the title is pulling from the cover page. And as you can tell, the sheet is protected, so you'll notice that pop up every once in a while. You just make sure you select the appropriate measure type. Is it a capital or retro commissioning measure? Input the measure life. You can refer to the SB 1149 measure life table that's in the ATAC guide. I believe that's in the TAS template as well. And then this will populate what the incentive rates are for electric only projects or gas and electric only. And so that was a recent update that we made this year, was to update the cost effectiveness calculator, which I'll go over in just a minute. Next table is your EEM list. So for this scenario, we're only looking at 2 EEMs. So what I like to do is hide everything that we're not looking at. So right now we're just looking at 2 EEMs. Unfortunately, you can't hide this because you're going to be hiding other important information. But so this is basically your summary table. Everything in white here pulls from somewhere else, so you're not able to change that, so you can't accidentally make a mistake or anything. The only number you can change here is the estimated project costs without the incentive. So We have eligibility costs, which include this line item 3 here. It's, you know, it may be incremental costs, full costs, or we're excluding costs such as permitting, shipping, crane use. And so if you actually have a full cost that we omitted some items, you know, that you can populate that there. Then we have the CEC calculation. So this is very similar to the tool you have for when you're writing your proposals. You just select the sector, the subsector, office, school, large office, whatever it is, and then the load profile. Keep in mind the load profile is where the savings are to happen. So if we're looking at VFD savings, you know, it's mostly going to be from the motors, and then there's no gas savings for this example. So there's a lot of times where I guess you'll estimate, you know, you'll think it's going to be cooling only savings, but in reality, there's more savings from the fans and not necessarily the compressor or the mechanical cooling portion. So just wanted to highlight that. And then you'll also see this checkbox here that says the likelihood that it's going to meet cost effectiveness or not. So in this scenario, they both meet cost effectiveness. And then down here in your tables, you'll input cost estimates either from a contractor, which is the ideal. We want to get as most realistic cost estimates as possible. You are welcome to use RS means or, you know, a previous study, but usually we want to get contractor estimates up front first. And then if we're not able to get any other costs, then we can defer to RS means or some other source. But yeah, pretty self-explanatory here. You just put your item in, what the labor is, cost, unit, and whatnot. And if, let's say this is an incremental approach and you need to factor out code baseline, I don't know, just put your cost here, put that, and then you can make it negative. So then you can cover what the actual incremental cost is there. And then we also have non-energy benefits that you can apply here. So you just need to make sure you add the value. Try to refrain from using just hard-coded like $5,000 in non-energy benefits. You know, maybe it's $30 an hour from labor saved times, I don't know, 100 hours. You know, that's your non-energy benefits. Then you explain the source or provide a short description of how we came up with that number. And then, try to clean up your rows and hide things that aren't relevant here. And then you can hide all these tables that we're not using. So now it's just, we're focused on EM1 and 2, and we don't see any other measures that we're not looking at. Okay. Moving on to utility data narrative sheets. You'll see row or column V has a little description. And I provided a description here. I have noticed that there have been some questions on people not really knowing what to put here as for the utility data narrative. It seems like we don't really ask that for the full TAS, but we're asking that for here. I wouldn't spend too much time on this. We just need to understand how the site's working, where it's getting its energy use from, and things like that. So just a short and sweet description should suffice. You're able to change the years here for natural gas and electric, and Nate Collins is the one that usually sends the utility data. So you just copy and paste the derivative data into here, and there's no other work you need to do. And then so an example of the narrative would be like the small office electric usage primarily consists of lighting, plug loads, HVAC fans, and compressors and pool pumps. And then gas usage consists of HVAC, pool heating, and domestic hot water. Electrical use in the summer is higher due to the site keeping their spaces at 65 degrees for whatever reason. And then gas usage is consistent year over year. I will note some of these projects, if we're just looking at a streamlined TAS for like a hospital, and their usage is extremely high compared to if you're just looking at one system, we still require that we input the utility data and then maybe just make a note of this is a hospital, we're only focused on one system, but so the utility data isn't all that relevant for this study, something like that. But we do need a description, and so try not to leave this blank as you go through the Streamlined TAS. All right, measure details sheet. So the purpose of this sheet is for the reviewing team to be able to trace back to where the calculations are done. If you don't really fill this out, it can be difficult for us, especially if you have like 10 different spreadsheets of weather data and calculations. It can be cumbersome for our team to dig into how you came up with the calculations and what assumptions you used and things like that. So the whole purpose of this sheet is to help point us to where you've done the calculations. But I will say, especially since I've used this template a lot of times, it can take a lot of time to fill out every little formula and assumption used and things like that. So I would just say use your discretion on how you want it to show us how you did the calculations. So if we're just looking at something simple, you don't need to show how you calculated the fan horsepower. Like we can go and trace that back to the calculation. Like you don't need to type a manual formula. I mean, at bare minimum, include the high level formula, and then we can trace back, what you use for load factor or what you use for motor efficiency, and just state high level baseline assumptions. And so an assumption would be load factor. Where did you find that? ATAC guide. That's perfectly acceptable to use. And then modeled values like exhaust fan 1 horsepower, nameplate data, it's a constant, it's 10 horsepower. I mean, right here I think is a little overkill. But I would say if you're spending more time filling this sheet out than you are doing the calculations, then there's something, then we don't need to spend as much time on this measured detail sheet. Just try to provide what you're changing from the baseline to what you're changing in the propose. And so for this baseline description example, I try to keep the description short and sweet, but still provide enough information for us to understand. So for this small office has a 10,000 square foot parking garage that has a 10 horsepower exhaust fan that operates 24/7 at full speed. So right here, I referenced EEM1 calc sheet, which is over to the right here, where that energy use formula came from. So as a reviewer, we can go back, check H5, see all the description and the formulas used and verify it from there. Same with all of these down here. And then for this proposed measure, the site received a quote. They're wanting to add a VFD to the exhaust fan and control the exhaust fan at 80% speed. No, this is just an example. I know this isn't code. They can definitely run their fan better. But just for the purposes of this tutorial, it's just an example. So EEM1 formulas, just put the same formula, except you added the fan laws for the speed, root 2.5 times the hours divided by motor efficiency and VFD efficiency. Things that we assumed, we don't really know the VFD efficiency, so we use the ATAC guide. Put the value there, exponent, again, we use the ATAC guide, and then speed, that's what the contractor told us, then we'll just run with that number, and there we go, 80% speed. So ideally, you want to have your calculations embedded within this Streamlined TAS template. I think the only scenario where we're okay with you providing us an additional workbook is if you have a macro enabled workbook and you're not able to copy over the calculations effectively. But for most of these projects, the hope is to have the Excel calculations within this whole template. And so here's an example of the calcs. I referenced H5. There's the formulas. Basically, if we're able to, I mean, this is very simple. So if we're able to identify and just review the formulas and make sure everything is okay, then we really don't need a ton of detail in this measure details sheet. I will note that we do like having some sort of color coding. So as you can see here, yellow is what the baseline and the salmon color is proposed, and everything that's not highlighted did not change. So that helps at least me visually see as a reviewer that the only thing you're changing is you're adding proposed speed, the VFD efficiency, and then the energy usage changed. And so once you have your calculations done, you can reference them to the model sheet or the analysis sheet. And so you'll just reference EEM1 calcs H5 as the baseline, and then H9. So all of those numbers go all the way back to energy and economic summary. So we've got our savings estimates that came from that analysis sheet. So there's really no additional work that you need to do to keep tracing back with all these calculations as long as you can. I would not hard code these numbers, especially if you have round 2 or round 3 revisions. You know, as long as you keep this the same and let's say the motor efficiency was actually 85%, you wouldn't have to double the work and change what's in the analysis sheet either. So that's one example of one measure. If you had multiple measures, you would have to beef up the baseline description and include the baseline description for, EEM 1 and 2. So I didn't necessarily do that here, but I do have an example for EEM 2 and kind of the level of detail we would like to see. So for this example, RTU1 is a single zone system that serves the entire small office space. RTU1 was manufactured by Carrier Train, model YCD 300 in 2007, and has a heating input of 500 MVH and cooling capacity of 25 tons. So we want to understand, the model number of the system, the heating efficiency, cooling efficiencies, the nominal airflow, the horsepower of the supply fan and the relief fan, understand how that's operating, and then understand how that unit is controlled. What else? Yeah, so it's controlled by a programmable thermostat, set point 68, 73, etc. So this would be in addition to what you would put in the baseline. And then for EM2 proposed, I mean, I didn't do this appropriately, but I think you hopefully understand what I'm saying. This is what the baseline description is for EEM2. So you would put that up along in this baseline description here, and then you can just revise the language and say we're converting RTU1 from a constant air volume to a variable air volume system and things like that. So that's what, yeah, I did this wrong. But so here's what the proposed description would be. The site received a quote to install a VFD on the supply and relief fan, add a pressure sensor to the ductwork to vary the speed of the fans based on static pressure. It's estimated that the minimum supply fan speed will be 50% in heating mode and will ramp up to 100% in cooling mode. The relief fan will track the supply fan by 25%, i.e. when supply fan is 50% speed, return fan will be at 25% speed. So that gives us the parameters, what we would look for if this measure was implemented. Like we would be double checking to make sure that fan was set at 50% speed, minimum heating or maximum heating, and then, it ramps back up to 100% in cooling mode. So these aren't the best examples, but the whole purpose of this sheet is for reviewers to help trace back how you did the calculations and cut down on review time so we can actually understand. And then I would say some other tips for calculations, like for this one, if you can include supporting photos, snapshots, that also helps us, even in the calculation sheet. So if you had a nameplate photo of the exhaust fan and maybe a description from the customer that said, yeah, this exhaust fan's running 24/7, there's no VFD. Here's a picture of the controls, or however it's working. If you can keep it all to one sheet, that helps us as reviewers. But I understand if it's a more somewhat complicated system and you're not going to have simple calculations that only take up this many rows. So that's for both this whole measure details sheet is for both capital and retro commissioning measures. And in addition, for retro commissioning, you don't have to necessarily use this exact table, but similar to the full TAS, we do want to see, especially for retro commissioning, what's the baseline and what are you changing in the proposed? Because that helps us when we do a post-installment verification. That helps us determine what we need to look for, and also may help to determine what the customer or the installing contractor needs to implement. So just keep that in mind. And then we have another sheet that's other opportunities. If you find out that there's no other opportunities at the site, hide the sheet. You don't need to use it. I don't think this is used all that much, but if you do happen when you do a site visit to notice that there's, they have a 80% efficient gas water heater and they potentially could upgrade to a condensing water heater, put the label it, EEM1 in the title, like domestic hot water upgrade, and provide a little description. Maybe they had 2 water heaters. I don't remember what the incentive is off the top of my head, but say it's 800. And then, yeah, I guess 800. So, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's not a hard requirement that you need to identify, but in general, if you are doing site visits, it's good to try to look for other opportunities when and where possible. And then you can provide a brief description of solar and lighting opportunities as well. And lastly, there's this appendix here. You're welcome to paste, snippets of example nameplates or supporting information here, or if it's easier, just to PDF, not do it in Excel and just PDF as part of the appendix that you submit to us. That works as well. I find that, we only have 4 blocks here, and then I don't know, it just gets messy doing this in Excel if you're trying to paste photos here, but I'll leave that up to your discretion on how you feel like you would need to do that. We just need to make sure we have enough information to prove that the calculations and the numbers used are relatively accurate. So basically, we want you to show your work so we can verify the study. And then the only thing here, analysis file, you can say refer to sheet EEM1 calcs or EEM2 calcs. But again, we don't want you to spend a bunch of time doing a bunch of admin work on this whole template. So try to keep it as short and sweet as possible while still meeting the requirements that we would need to complete the review. And another note here, if you do want to add captions, you can insert shape and then this little text box here. And yeah, so just make sure all the numbers refer back to the analysis spreadsheet. You can also do your calculations within the spreadsheet. That works too. You can create your own spreadsheet, or you can copy over your standard workbook that you may have, and then just copy those sheets over to this template and just submit everything in one package. And if you have logged data or any other like weather data sources that were used, please include all supporting documentation or calculations that were used. So if you're using weather data for your calculations, include, at least the raw weather file. If you're doing any data logging, include all the data log data, things like that. So I think with that, do we have any questions? I know it can be a lot, but the whole purpose is for it to be streamlined. And yeah, there are some scenarios where I end up spending more time filling out this template than doing the actual calculations. So I understand if there's we do want to work on improvements. So I'm open, or we're open to any suggestions you have to help make this process a little quicker. And then ideally we'd like to revise this template and incorporate everyone's feedback so we can make this process better moving forward.
Patrick, there's a question from Mark in the chat. Can you name some more examples of measures that would lend to the streamlined TAS?
Yeah. I guess heat recovery, ventilator upgrades. I've seen some controls upgrades that have gone through the streamlined TAS. VFD upgrades, we already covered. I mean, anything that you can really calculate in an Excel spreadsheet that meets the parameters of less than 200,000 kilowatt hours and 5,000 therms is, usually will suffice. So, I mean, boiler upgrades potentially. Yeah, I mean, it can be, you just don't want it to be too complex. So if you're modeling a 75,000 square foot building that has 14 rooftop units and they're wanting to do a controls upgrade, that's going to be better suited for a full TAS. But if it's a 25,000 square foot building, they've got 2 or 3 rooftop units and a boiler, that potentially could be a streamlined TAS study. That's, yeah. I mean, if there's something you have in mind, let me know. But there's really no limit other than we want to keep it somewhat low complex instead of, a fancy new controls upgrade that's better suited for a full-blown energy model and full study.
There's a space on the new task proposal template to indicate which study format you intend to use. So when you're submitting that, you're welcome to select the one you think might be there, and we'll make sure that we double check that that's appropriate on our end when that's reviewed.
Anything else? Anything you want me to dig into deeper?
Another couple questions in the chat. So one of them, how receptive is the team to including bin calcs on the streamlined TAS?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fine. We've seen bin calcs. I mean, I do my own bin calcs, so yeah. As long as we can, trace back to where everything came from, then that's acceptable. And I will note, if you are using, the same workbook over and over again, if you could just create your own baseline formulas that references the high level stuff that we would normally check, then you can create somewhat your own template for your own workbook that you won't have to revise each and every time necessarily. You may just need to remove or add a few things here and there. So that may help things be a little bit quicker, so you don't have to fill this whole formula description table out every time.
Thanks. And then another question from Carl. With boilers being prescriptive, when might they qualify for custom? Carl, I think that one might be as simple as if they don't meet the requirements of the prescriptive measure. But
yeah, we've had a few projects where a boiler, for prescriptive, a boiler needs to meet the requirements of it. It needs to solely serve HVAC systems, but there's some scenarios where you've got a boiler plant that has a heat exchanger that serves domestic hot water, a pool, and HVAC. And so in that scenario, that would be a custom study because it wouldn't be eligible for prescriptive.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you all. All right, then I will hold back over here and give a final request for questions or feedback. We'll hang around a few minutes as well. You're welcome to ask anything, but otherwise, thank you. Here's our contact information. This webinar will be uploaded and available. I'm going to get links to both of these, the first one and this one, on the website very shortly here for you. Go ahead and end the recording there. Thanks all.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.